Am I the asshole for not wanting to raise my new sibling? Throwaway account here. I am a 24-year-old woman who just finished my bachelor's degree and started my first professional job. I had a rough childhood growing up. My father was an alcoholic and my mother didn't really want to be a mom and she was out partying all of the time. My sister is 16 now and I feel like she is my kid. We were left alone for days and even weeks at a time when I was growing up. My sister was much younger than me, so I took over the role of being a parent to her. I was the one who washed her hair and helped her with her homework and held her when she cried and made sure she had food to eat. My parents never did any of that for us. When I was 16, something happened at my parents' house that made me fear for both my safety and my sister's safety, so I moved out and took her with me. My parents didn't care. I got 2 part-time jobs, went to school, and raised my sister the best I could. We were really poor, but I would have given my life for her, still would, and she is really good kid. A few years ago, my father died and my mom remarried. The new husband is pretty much a carbon copy of my father. After my father's death, my mom reached out to me for the first time in years and said she wanted to be back in my and my sister's life. I didn't really want to, but my sister wanted to, so I did it for her. At first it was okay, but my mom is back into drugs and her new husband is just as bad if not worse. The problem is my mom and her new husband had a little girl. She is 6 months old now. And apparently they are doing the same things that she and my dad did with me and my sister, leaving her alone for hours at a time. I was not aware of this, but I have to say I am not surprised. Another relative reported her to CPS and now they need to find a temporary home for my half-sister or she is going to be put in foster care. My mom suggested me, but I said I didn't want to raise another one of her kids. I understand that she is my half-sister, but I have pretty much raised myself and my sister and I am just tired. I am finally looking at a future where my sister will be going to college in 2 years and I will finally have a life of my own. I have sacrificed so much for my sister and I don't regret that at all, but I just want to have a life where I can be lazy for a bit if I want and I can focus on just myself, instead of constantly caring for another human being. I've never had that chance before. My mom is livid and saying that I am a horrible person for not taking in my half-sister. She says it will be temporary, until she gets her life cleaned up, but this woman has never had her life in order. I know if I take my half-sister, I will be raising yet another child and I won't have a chance to live a life of my own until I'm over 40. I do feel awful about my half-sister ending up in foster care, and I do want to be a part of her life, I just don't want to be a parent to her. Am I the asshole for saying no? Edited to add. I did try to shelter my other sister as much as possible about what was going on in our home. She was 7.5 when we moved out, so she doesn't remember a lot about what happened, and we weren't in contact with our mother until 2019, so I just kind of brushed off her questions and said that our parents weren't mentally well and I thought we would be better on our own. I was really hopeful that things had changed, but I still kept a really close eye on what kind of contact I allowed them to have. I have supervised every in-person interaction they've had, for example. I did talk to her tonight and gave her the whole truth, and while she was upset to learn it, she definitely understands a lot more about what happened and why we're not going to have contact with our mother anymore. As for the relative who reported her to CPS, she is not in the position to take on a baby due to a chronic health condition that is growing progressively worse. Not the asshole. I love how she calls you horrible when she's the one not fit to be a parent. This is not your responsibility. You've already done more than enough. It's time to live your life. You probably should go back to NC though. I feel like she's going to start harassing you about this. You are not the asshole, op. Parentification is a form of abuse in which a child is forced to take on a parental role for their sibling. Your childhood was stolen from you, and now you're facing the prospect of having to relive that trauma. You've shouldered a heavy burden for the better part of your life, and it's okay to feel that you can't do it all over again. After having had the role of primary provider and caregiver placed on you for so long, nobody can reasonably blame you for finally taking time to focus on your own emotional well-being. Your half-sister has been placed in a horrible situation, but putting yourself in another one wouldn't be healthy for either of you. Not the asshole. It's not your responsibility to clean up your mother's messes. The baby will probably be better off in a foster to adopt situation. Not the asshole. Your mom might as well be a stranger. Would you agree to raise a stranger's baby? You've already raised your sister, and you're doing very well it sounds like. This isn't your responsibility. Not the asshole. You are not responsible for your mother's poor decisions. It isn't your job to raise her child because she's too irresponsible to do so. If your mother cares and truly doesn't want her child taken away permanently, she needs to use this as an opportunity to get herself together. Based on what you've said, that makes it even more important to set a boundary with her by saying no. If she really wants to pull it together, it is going to take work she may be more inclined to put in if she realizes you aren't the one who will be bailing her out. Not the asshole. It might be good for you to go no contact with your mom. That will remove all the negative energy from your life. Not the asshole. It won't be temporary. If the baby is taken away and put in foster care, that can be the best thing for everyone. Not the asshole. I am a social worker who works with families that had their children removed, and being a relative placement is hard. You are not entitled to the same benefits that a foster family is: childcare, monthly stipend for necessities, respite weekends, and you also have the emotional burden of trying to assist your family member with their addiction. This is definitely not a decision to take lightly. They will place the baby in a foster home that will be looking to adopt, and most of the time in my experience foster families want to keep up relationships with safe relatives. You could see if you could take her for a weekend every month or something to spend time with her if you want. But by no means should you have to raise a child that you are not financially or emotionally prepared for. Am I the asshole for being brutally honest telling someone why we drifted apart after high school? This just happened a few weeks ago, but I graduated from high school in '88. My wife and I were out for dinner and drinks and met up with some friends. We bumped into an older friend, Dan, from high school, and his wife and friends. Basically everyone knew everyone else. As the night went on, we talked about who we still keep in contact with. In high school I hung with a couple of friend groups and am still close to one of them. The other friend group consisted of Dan and another kid named Mike. After we graduated I basically stopped talking to both of them. Dan assumed that I drifted away from the other friend group as well. He was a bit shocked that I was still in contact with them. Just an FYI, with the exception of LinkedIn I do not have a social media presence. He just assumed we drifted apart after college. He asked what happened. Here is where I might be an asshole because of how truthful I was. My father passed away my senior year in March. Mind you, Dan and Mike were over my house a lot and knew my dad. They were fascinated with war-related stuff, and my dad served in Korea and was highly decorated. When he passed, they never called. They didn't show up at the wake or funeral. I took a week off after his funeral, and when I saw them I got what was, I thought, a half-assed, "Sorry, how are you doing?" Nothing, how's your mom or anything. Meanwhile my friends Sean and Chris were by my side the whole time. That pissed me off, and I realized they were shitty friends and shitty people. That and a few other choice comments too. So I told him all of this. Well, he got uncomfortable and tried to mumble an apology, and I told him it was not important and not to bother. It kinda killed the mood for the rest of the night, and everyone left shortly thereafter. My wife said I didn't have to be so detailed in my response back to Dan, and while it was amusing to see the look on his face, I was an asshole for being blunt and wrecking the night. Edit. So here is how the question and answer came about. This was from an earlier reply. After hearing how I still see the other friends often and am very close to Sean and Chris, Dan got a little squirrely. I asked him how was Mike and if he still was in contact with him. He was, but not as close I am with the other friend group. Dan then went on to talk about all that we did and time we spent together, and speculated that going to college was the main reason. Then he said, "So why did we stop hanging out?" In kind of a way he was the victim. It lit a fire in me and it all came roaring back pretty quick. I replied back with this: if you really do not know, or have forgotten why, well, it was because when I hit my first low point, the death of my father, you and Mike never made an attempt to be there for me. No calls to see how I was doing that day, no wake, no funeral, no swing by the house afterwards, and no calls the week I was out of school. You guys never offered an explanation either, or at least an apology. Now Sean and Chris were there for me, and provided support for me. They would routinely check in on me during school for the first month after, until they felt I was doing better. As we got closer to the end of the year, I realized that they were my real friends and you and Mike were not. I generally reached out to you guys more, and when I slowed down, you two never asked why or made attempts to call me. The summer of '88, I decided to move on because I knew you two were shitty friends and I could never count on you two being there when it would matter. Was I hurt by it? Hell yes I was. Do I hope I hurt him? No, but I wanted him to realize this was on him, not me. Dan should not have asked you that question in a public place. And you should not have answered it in so much detail in a public place. You were inconsiderate towards your wife and anyone else there who was just trying to have a decent night. But in the end, people shouldn't ask questions they don't want the answer to. And your reasons were very valid for dumping him as a friend. It's just. Try harder to read the room. If you really wanted Dan to know, you had literally years where you could have told him in a more appropriate scenario. You passed up the appropriate scenario, so you don't get to pretend like the inappropriate scenario was your only option. Your wife was right. If it was therapeutic for you to get that stuff off your chest, then maybe it was worth it for you. But if you're legitimately over it and don't really care anymore, then you should have chosen a more socially graceful approach. Not the asshole. Did you truly feel that way? The answer is yes. Did Dan want to know why? Yes. You are the asshole for bringing this all up now. Senior year? So you were all 17 or 18. They weren't shitty people for not knowing how to handle a friend's parent passing away at that age. Even nowadays I don't know how to properly handle it. Almost everyone just uses the clichés because it's a terrible awkward situation with no room for mistakes. Everyone grieves differently. Some people want to talk, while others would prefer to have some space or talk about something else. They probably cared, but just gave you some space because that's what they would have wanted. You are the asshole for not considering that not everyone thinks the way you do, and for ruining your first time together in decades. Not the asshole. People need to learn to not ask the question unless they are ready to hear the answer. He asked. You told the truth. More truth than he wanted to hear. That is on him for asking. You are the asshole. You cut off your friends because in your view they didn't provide you with enough sympathy and support. Frankly, I think that is petty, since it doesn't sound like you said anything to them about it, and that is a big expectation to put on anyone, let alone teenage boys. To then hold that grudge for 30 years and publicly shame them for this wrong they didn't even know they committed. That is total asshole behavior. You are the asshole. Why would you think it was appropriate to insult the guy in front of everyone? Clearly you were bothered if you went so far as to add in the insults. That isn't brutal honesty, that's being an asshole. Sure, that guy didn't do right by you, but I'm sure he brought that question up lightheartedly. Am I the asshole for snapping at my 29F coworker, subordinate, 52M, after he repeatedly interrupted me? Hi, all. I hope this post finds you in good health. My situation at work is a little weird. I was a technical writing intern at a small manufacturing plant for about 3 years. My workplace used to either force their salaried managers to do the technical writing, or they would outsource their tech writing needs to unpaid interns. This changed about 3 years ago. I was basically hired as a technical writer right after I graduated college, and have since started to assume managerial roles on the manufacturing floor. I'm not a manager, but it is my job to create safety protocols for new machinery, train new employees, and ensure the well-being and safety of the people on the manufacturing floor. I'm a manager in all but pay and title. Please note, this is my first non-service sector job, so I don't know if this is typical of the industry or not. I deal with a lot of questionable behavior, but one coworker, Ian, is particularly grating on the nerves. He's only been working at this manufacturing plant for a year, but has a habit of talking over people. He also rushes jobs in an attempt to increase efficiency, even though by rushing these jobs, he's actually endangering his coworkers. He has personal reasons for this, but I still had to give him a verbal warning one day. Then, last week he left work before his job was finished, more than 2 hours before he was technically scheduled to leave. Thankfully I noticed the unfinished work, so one was hurt or in danger of being hurt, but things had gotten out of hand. I took him aside and told him that I understood he had some personal issues, but if that was the case, he needed to talk to his shift supervisor and get someone to fill the hours he couldn't work. He then started talking over me, telling me that A. I had no idea what it was like to have a family and so needed to keep my mouth shut. B. I needed to respect the people who actually did the work around there. C. I made everyone's jobs harder with needless safety protocols, and D. I had no idea how the world worked. I tried to respond to his complaints, but unfortunately he wouldn't stop talking. Eventually, I finally snapped and said, "Don't interrupt me again." After I repeated myself for the 3rd time, I felt myself getting too heated to continue, so I slammed my briefcase on a nearby table and stormed away from him. When I came back and apologized, he told me that my problem was that I talked too much and didn't listen. He also complained to my manager and is seeking, but likely won't get, a write-up for me. Technically we're co-workers on the same general pay level, but I have seniority over him, and everyone in the company recognizes that I have unofficial authority. A few of the managers are saying that I overreacted, and though I disagree, I can't tell if that's because I genuinely feel I'm in the right, or if the other sexism is getting to me. So, did I overreact? Am I in the wrong here? Edit. For those asking, my actual title is Technical Communicator. I make $50,000 a year. Someone with the position I was filling in for would make $80,000 a year. This was done last year, and was supposed to be temporary until we hired someone with the proper qualifications. Unfortunately we have yet to hire anyone with those qualifications, and I'm still technically filling in even though I have yet to get paid for it. This was all approved by upper management. So, you told an adult that kept interrupting you to not interrupt you? NTA. He behaves like a rude and grumpy teenager. So let me get this straight. He's leaving early without concluding his duties, without notifying his manager, endangering his coworkers, shifting the blame on you for reprimanding him, which BTW you did in private, interrupting you, reporting you behavior, making a stereotypically sexist remark on you talking a lot and not listening. Somehow you could be in the wrong. I'm sorry, but this smells at best like insubordination and at worst like encouraged sexism with a stain of reckless endangerment. Not the asshole. Not the asshole. He seems like the type that thinks because he's older he knows best, and maybe that's the case sometimes, but here you have your job and he has his, and if he wants to do things more efficiently, he should bring it up to the powers that be. One shouldn't talk over the other, but when people think they're right they don't care. Also, I would look for another job in the same field that pays you equal amount to the responsibilities you have. Not the asshole. Why is he saying that you've got no idea what it feels like to have a family, like it would mean you've got no common sense? I am sure plenty of employees at your company have family commitments and still manage to inform their managers if they have an emergency and need to leave early. Also, safety protocols are there for a reason, and this guy's a total ass for disregarding the safety of his colleagues. Not the asshole. Safety regulations are important. He's putting others at risk and the company is liable by allowing it to continue without him being on PIP or something. He can't just leave work without saying anything and then verbally freak out on you to the point that you have to escalate. Edit to add your company is kinda the asshole for making you manage him without giving you the actual title or seniority to do so. NTA, he needs to go. Not the asshole. He sounds like he's a misogynistic I would go to HR about his behavior and how he abandoned his job 2 hours before his shift ended, which can most likely be verified, which could have caused other issues. If anyone deserves the write-up, it's him. You were right to bring up the safety issues you have with him, but seniority in time worked and an official managerial seniority are two different things. People may see you as a manager, but you aren't one. Talking to someone about their missed time at work is not your job. Again, you can tell him your safety concerns, but stay in your lane. Am I the asshole for mildly telling off a cashier for being sort of rude? 38 male, stopped by a local grocery store on my way home the other day. It was late and fairly close to their closing time. They were about a half hour from closing by the time I made it to the checkout line. I had ended up getting stuck staying late at work that evening trying to clean up a mess, only to end up getting dressed down by my boss right before I left over something that I was unfairly blamed for. I just wanted to go home but had to stop by the store in order to have food for breakfast and lunch the next day. I mentioned this to admit that I wasn't in the best mood and may have been somewhat emotionally reactive that evening. So, I got my groceries and then went up to the line and began to put my products on the conveyor. I nodded at the cashier, probably early to mid-20s, and said, "Hello." She just sighed and began to ring up my purchases. Her response struck me as a little antisocial, but I let it go. After she finished ringing me up, she deadpan told me my total. I paid and she handed me my receipt. I then said, "Thank you. Have a nice evening." She just grunted a vague, "Yep," in response. For some reason this bothered me more than it maybe should have. I said, "Geez, I've been polite with you. Would it kill you to do the same with me?" She just looked at me with a surprised expression and said, "Well, sorry. I did my job." I didn't say anything else. I just bagged up my purchases and left. For some reason this little confrontation is still bothering me. I feel like maybe I gave her a hard time when it wasn't necessary. Maybe she was having a bad day. For all I know her boyfriend had just broke up with her, or she had just found out that she had a terminal condition, or she had just found out that her parents were getting divorced after 30+ years, etc. But I hadn't exactly had a great day myself, but still managed to treat her with some basic courtesy and just wanted the same in response. Am I the asshole? Edit. The verdict is in. Thank you everyone for the responses. I can agree that it was unnecessary and unhelpful for me to say anything to her, and that I'm the asshole for that. One thing I have to comment on though is that some people seem to be implying that I was some sort of creeper who wanted her to smile or laugh at my lame jokes. Not at all. Nor did I want to be called sir, or otherwise have my ass kissed. In my opinion, during a business transaction it's rude to not return a greeting or to answer, "Thank you, have a nice evening," with a grunt. She was rude. No, not in an extreme way but in a passive way she was. She acted as if it was a major imposition on her time to have to ring up my 15 or so items, and while it's not the worst thing in the world and can even be understandable, it's not okay. Also, I'm not sure why everyone just assumes that she is making minimum wage, which I highly doubt. I'm sure she isn't getting a high wage, but it's unlikely that she's only getting minimum. Most of us have worked retail or food service jobs in our lifetimes, and dealing with the public definitely isn't easy. Again, it wasn't worth me making an issue out of. I should have just let it go, and if it kept happening at that particular store, just found somewhere else to get my groceries. Again, thanks everyone for the responses. You are the asshole. It's a minimum wage job where you have to be on your feet all day. She did her job. Her job isn't to cheer you up or look aesthetically pleasing. She wasn't rude. You were. Speaking as someone who has 20 years in retail behind me, you weren't the first person to give her the third degree that day. That's why she has the attitude she has. That's why she reacted to you like she did. As for you, she was just someone handy to drop your bad mood on. You are the asshole. You are the asshole. Also, a genuine question, would you have had the same reaction to a male cashier? Might be worth checking your biases. In 38 years of life, you've never had a cashier that wasn't super friendly? You are the asshole. This girl makes minimum wage, leave her alone. Minimum wage workers don't owe you emotional labor. Even if it's in their job description, nobody can keep that up for a full shift PF constant customers without slip-ups. Not when your compensation is literally not enough money to survive anyways. Nobody gives stellar service 30 minutes before closing, literally nobody. You are the asshole. Cashier obviously wasn't training manual cheery, but that's not a good enough reason for you to have a negative reaction. Some people are saying parenting, how you were raised, but this gives me a "you should smile more" vibe of when men expect women to act a certain way or respond to their presence, advance in a positive manner, and get mad when they don't. Trust your instincts on this one and give people working cruddy jobs a bit more slack. Best of luck with your work situation. You are the asshole. You spend a paragraph telling us what a bad you've had, and don't spend a second to consider maybe she's an equally bad one. She did her job, mate, give her a break. You are the asshole. Her job is exhausting and pays shit. I wouldn't have been enthusiastic either. Retail workers are not paid enough to care. May I suggest you go somewhere with a self-checkout next time?